We have a wonderful session today with Yi, Janesh, and Taka. I I think Emma, are you speaking in place of Taka or?
Yes, yes. So tech, you
Sorry.
can
So
get
okay.
it.
So let me correct that. It's Yi, Janesh, and Emma, who are lead engineers of PII Shield, which is a privacy technology helping redact PII in compliance with data privacy laws. And so, yeah, exciting session today. We'll be going because we have one presentation today. We'll be going only until 2 o'clock today. And yeah, if you folks have any updates for the group, please use the chat function. And also, if you have any questions, you can use the chat or you can unmute yourself. But we'll leave it to Yi, Janesh, and Emma to kind of introduce us to PII Shield, maybe for maybe 10 or 15 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up for discussion. And with that, I'll turn it over to our guests today.
Thank you, Roland. So hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Emma Fu. I'm helping out the product side for PI Shield or Pi Shield, whatever you prefer. I prefer Pi Shield. I am also a senior technical product manager at AWS in my day-to-day. E and Janesh are our engineer leads for PyShield. E is also head of TypeScript and partnerships at Llama Index, and Janesh is a senior engineer at Snowflake. As Roland shared, PyShield is an open source library built on top of LM to manage PI-related information from files or logs. So I assume most of the folks on this call are very familiar with PII, which is personal identifiable information. And so the capability that PyShield has built so far includes scanning PII information, data redaction, or risk evaluation. So we're also in the process of exploring use case for data deletion. A bit of fun history for all of you. We founded PyShield at the first CodeX Law Hackathon back in May 2023, last year. And then later that year, September, last September, we attended the second hackathon and were able to showcase some of the work the team had been doing ever since the beginning. So just a reminder to E and Janesh, in about 2 weeks, we should do something for our 1-year anniversary. So thanks, Megan, for organizing this meetup. Really give us this opportunity to talk about some of the cool things that PyShield has been doing lately. We also want to use this chance to talk more, kind of reintroduce, talk about the motivations to carry on doing this work and what else do we think, we could help and contribute in this field. So if you go to the next slide. So following my quick intro earlier, PyShield is a library that uses LM to scan identified PI information, right? But before we talk about our solution, let's take a quick pause here on the use case. Why do we care about PI? As a product manager, I understand the value of dive into the heaven of lake to learn customer insights, and these customer insights will later be converted into the real business opportunities. So everyone is trying to gather information from us, learn from our people's trends, behaviors, habits, relationships, networks, or any internet footprints, which is reasonable because that's how business operate and develop more features to make our life easier, right? However, I think there's a fine we believe there is a fine balance that companies need to maintain so they do not abuse information collected from people or even if they do not abuse the information, they need to set up a process and kind of follow that process to properly manage and store the information, right? But otherwise, improper use of the personal information can cause unimaginable negative consequences. I give you a personal example here. I was using this app to shop for some Asian snacks and small decoration for my friends. And then a few days after I registered on that app and provided my information, it became super sketchy as I started receiving messages from strangers texting me in Chinese. And then apparently that person also knew what I was shopping for. It was terrifying. And then a while later, I did get an email from the company and mentioned there was a data breach event. And so my data might have been disclosed. However, I think since I got that email, which was like almost 2 years, that company is still working on the same solution, because the other day I was chatting with my colleague and she registered on the app, and she started receiving the same like sketchy messages. So I don't want to dive too much on the downside, but just hearing my story, I think you all can imagine the potential consequences and the impact that it can have on the people, right? And so a lot of those data collections is not served for the actual business purpose. And I'm going to throw some of the big numbers at you. And sorry, I didn't share on the slides, but approximately over 80% of Americans today can be uniquely identified by a combination of their names or even just a preferred name, right? Like mine, Emma Fu. And more than 60% of consumers would stop using website if they heard concerns about data security issues, right? And then last year, when we started working on PyShield, Meta was fined $1.3 billion for violating the GDPR. So speaking of the business potential of PI-related initiatives, I think this definitely indicates there is a substantial market and industry need for this. So, if you want to go to the next slide. So now we know the needs of data protection and business values in this field. I am just quickly going to spend a few minutes to share some of the key conditions of right to be forgotten from GDPR. And this guidance actually help us come up with our top features for PyShield. I think there was 4 major conditions, and the most important two is discontinuations of service by customers and withdrawal of consent. So usually in this case is, if someone cancel, let's say someone cancel their Amazon Prime account, Amazon should no longer return that person's information like names, address, ages, and then etc. And it also happens if a customer's, give permissions to company initially, they can use their data, but then later on withdraw that consent. Under these conditions, business companies need to remove all the relevant information. And so the last two is unlawful collection of or use of data, or if the data collected from minors, they have to company have a right to remove the information. So these 4 conditions afford data collection or removal, but most customers today, when they first register on a app or a website, they typically agree to or give permissions to the business to use their data, right? So we believe that the actual customers' pinpoint as of now is not just about deletion, well, which is important, but the most crucial aspect is to manage information properly. So this means now that we have a customer's information, how do we manage and store it in a good and safe way? And later on, when we want to analyze their information, how do we analyze their data without disclosing their actual personal information, right? And so think about, if we want to redact their information, how do we avoid over-redaction? So therefore, we need to make sure we scan our logs and files to identify all correct personal information. And please go to the next slide. So for the scanning part, we reviewed these 4 major regulations: HIPAA, COPA, GDPR, and CCPA. And then we identified a group of entities that are commonly and generally recognized as personal information across all of these regulations, such as their first name, their last name, age, address, date of birth. And then we also identified a subgroup of areas where specific regulations place more emphasizes like HIPAA, right? The health conditions being the most important items under HIPAA, and which must be protected and cannot be shared unless absolutely necessary. And COPA is more concerned with areas related to minors or children, right? Because we train our train LM to identify information, so we need to consider all possible scenarios where a person might share his or her information, such as health conditions, or a child may talk to his friends or just share comments on the internet and may disclose their own information. So whether it's their wish or not, and we need to incorporate those contact-based information into the prompts. And that's essentially the art of the PyShield. And if you want to carry on, feel free to wrap the stage.
Okay, thanks, Emma. So yeah, so the next thing, one of the things we listed here is CCPA, right? And one of the important things about CCPA is it's applicable to most tech companies, right? Here in California, if you have California users, if you have over $25 million in revenue or 50,000 users, you're covered by the CCPA. And, I think right now in the industry, there's a little bit of like, hey, who cares, right? Very few people have gotten in trouble. But if we go to the next slide here, right? Like, it's a few people have gotten into trouble so far, right? There actually have been a few companies that have gotten into trouble, but not ones that you've really heard of. But actually, the requirements are very, very similar to the GDPR. So there's actually quite a lot of things to be done here. And the problem is, if you look at history, anybody remember this person? This attorney general decided, hey, there were these privacy policy regulations on the books, and they decided that they were going to enforce them. And this was in 2012, right? So all of a sudden, all these companies started getting notification that they needed to comply with this law that has been on the books for a while. I don't know what happened to that attorney. I don't know, but I think this is definitely an ongoing risk for companies. So what are the current solutions to handle PII? I think there's a few that we can call out. One is input and output filtering. So this is like something that OpenAI does, right? So when you talk to OpenAI and say, hey, give me some information, it may decide based on the output filters, hey, this is not information we want to disclose. What we have seen, despite OpenAI's substantial resources, is that these filters can almost inevitably be defeated, right? So they're not reliable. And it's a big problem for companies and for researchers, actually. So another one is manual processing. So, if you get a request under the CCPA or GDPR to manually identify all the places where the PII might exist, it's very expensive, right? And companies do this, but it's not really a scalable solution. And then from a technical approach, we've worked with a number of approaches that are sort of like regex based or old NER model based. And the problem is you have this problem of over recognition and redaction. So what do we mean by over recognition? Basically, the idea here is that PII, depending on the context, can look very much like non-PII. So I'll give you an example. Here's the sentence. Bill Ford is the CEO of Ford Motor Company and drives a Ford Mustang, right? In the sentence, Ford is mentioned 3 times, but the only Ford that is PII is the first one, Bill Ford. Ford Motor Company is not PII, and neither is a Ford Mustang. In fact, that might be legitimate data that you actually want to collect for your application's purposes. So it's important to distinguish between these. And the traditional methods tend to do a very, very bad job of distinguishing between PII and non-PII in this case. Another example would be, I live at 294 El Camino Real in Mountain View. My favorite restaurant is just down the street on El Camino. Last summer, I took a month to hike El Camino de Santiago, which is a hike in Spain. Once again, only the first one is PII. The second one, the second El Camino, is also an address, right? So in fact, we could also write 294 El Camino Real right there also, but that would also be not PII. So this is a problem that with traditional methods is very difficult to solve, but with PyShield is actually kind of easy. So next, we're going to have Janesh talk a little bit about the specific demo that we're going to be doing today and why it looks interesting.
Yeah, so just breezing through this, like a huge problem that comes up for software companies is when you're hiring interns, new developers, DevOps, whoever, you can have like situations where, you know, people are naturally debugging, right? They're trying to test and they add some logs and they end up printing everything from the log, and we have these to-dos, remove, and basically stuff that shouldn't be there. And what often happens with these logs is companies store every single data that gets output in case you need to naturally debug, you know, any outage or whatever. The problem is this creates a pretty big window of risk wherein you could be storing like user data in logs. And if a user deletes their information or submits a request, yeah, your company may have deleted it, you know, from the database, from you know, photo stores and file stores, but it may still be living somewhere in the logs. And this is like a real thing that most DevOps teams do. They collect the logs from everything, and then it gets stored near indefinitely. So to show you a quick demo, we put together a application and a visualization software that many companies use to view logs. So as you can see, we can see like the different logs from this server coming through. These are some old logs. And we have, so what we did with PII Shield is we added the ability to add transformations. So in these transformations, we have redact PII, which I added here. And this redact PII portion will send all of this data to PyShield, and depending on your configuration, it can either warn you or redact PII from your logs. So currently we have it set to a warn configuration, so it will warn us. So I'll enable this, and in the meantime, we'll add something in this application and see what happens with the log contamination. So I can enter my information, and as you could see, a lot of this is PII. Some of it is not, such as major and graduation date, but stuff like phone number, email, name. And actually, just for fun, I can actually put my name as Mercedes too to see if we can catch that. And just put some junk information. And then once we click submit, it says submit. But if we refresh this data, it will actually show that all of this got logged. And now when we enable PyShield, it will show us what PII was detected where. So as we can see, it will say like when we have tribe, Apache, race, native, it detected like there's some kind of race related attributes that's PII in these areas. It was able to detect whether something is like a birthday, phone number, a name, and it's able to separate these versus like, you know, car models or any other dates. Traditional models can often over redact. If it just sees a random date, it may say, oh, this could be PII, or names like Mercedes versus Mercedes car. It may say it's PII versus not. So another interesting thing is like our web server is also Apache, and it detects correctly like that this is just a log and there's no PII. But if we look at like the race and tribe portion, it's able to differentiate it. And this is one of the key things in PII Shield is that we're really able to separate with a much higher level of accuracy, like context-based PII versus just having, you know, general heuristics like, oh, this is what some PII may look like. Because if you don't have the accuracy, then over redaction will end up losing companies a lot more data. And oftentimes, many companies won't take the risk of over redacting and instead be open to the potential lawsuits or legal vulnerabilities, as E mentioned. So what's next is currently we have some coverage of certain attributes that we showed you, but we don't have full coverage yet. So we want to expand our PII categories and make sure we have full coverage for HIPAA, GDPR, and CCPA, since these are the most common regulations that companies need to be compliant with. We also want to have multilingual support, especially for things like GDPR, which is in Europe. It would really help with compliance in those areas. And we also want to use local models. Currently, we're using OpenAI's models to drive some of this, but with local models, there's much less chance of any data leak, and a company can control their own data provenance and really ensure that when they redact, the data is not going to anywhere else either. And for that, we were looking at Llama 3, which has been performing pretty well in our initial evaluations. Lastly, yeah, all of us have different full-time jobs, and we're trying to build this as a community research tool. So we would love any engagement contributions, and yeah.
Great.
Well, for
Well,
questions.
thank you so much to all of you. This is very cool and very interesting. I think Leo already asked a question that was also on my mind. Is, you know, basically how do you provide that sort of nuanced context awareness to the system? Is it through just using a large language model, which sort of understands the meaning of certain words placed around the PII, or is it you also gave that you showed how you entered the information in somewhat of a structured form, and is that sort of this kind of RAG type of thing is what you use to train the machine? Can you talk a little bit more about that? That's my first question. And the second one, I think you already answered also, which is like, I wanted to see, this is a great use case, this like, this DevOps type of use case is a great example. There must be many more. But it does sound like you're creating an open source project, maybe an Apache open source project, I don't know, so there's no, so you at any kind of, you all have full-time jobs, so you want to create a community around that, create an open source project, or do you also want to turn this into a business, maybe an open core type of business or something like that? How do you see this unfold just from a business or kind of from a go-to market kind of perspective?
Yeah. So with regard to the first question, I think so it is the LM that's doing all the differentiation, right? So there is some few shotting in the prompts to sort of guide the LM towards the right answer, but the LM actually understands. In fact, I don't think we mentioned anything about PHP in any of our few shots, right? So the LM just understands that PHP Apache, is probably not a racial indicator. And it understands that, that the tribe would be a racial indicator. So the LM is doing the heavy lifting there.
Cool.
In terms of future commercialization, I think it's a little early. It's a little early to really consider. I mean, right now, for us, it's like we've heard from many folks that this is a real need in the research community, right? So if you think about, like, if you're training your own models, for example, one of the problems becomes that if you have PII in your input data, right, let's say you're scraping the web, right, and there's some website out there that says, hey, this is Roland's address, right? Once that's in your input data, it sort of contaminates your model in a way that becomes impossible for you to really take out. Right, maybe you can say, okay, I'm going to do some filtering. If somebody asks, hey, what's Roland's address? I'm not going to answer that question. But then they start asking it in French, right? Or, there's ways to work around it. And if the model has that information, then it becomes very difficult for you to actually take that out of the model. It's basically impossible from what we've seen. And similarly,
So you think it's especially useful for people training new models and making sure that the data are the data that go into the training set are free of PII.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right, that is great. So mostly sort of for the research, for this very rapidly growing research community, this would be very useful. And is it already like accessible? Is it sort of out there on GitHub? People can already download the libraries?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so somebody had their hand up. Who was that? Okay, no. Well, great.
Me, sorry.
Yeah, do you have a question?
Yes, I have a question. The command, reading from Brussels. First of all, fascinating application. Yes, we like that the US is producing solutions for European-made problems like data protection and privacy. That's a bit the approach that more solutions coming from there. Then the conference is doing like that. It's also the privacy forum of the ENISA. And my question would be, what for? And one thing that we are considering in Europe is anonymization of court decisions, or pseudonymization. So that's a rule to have to take out all personal information in court decisions. And that would be a quite fascinating application. And there are some companies one in Switzerland, and they also presented their stuff here, Roland knows, who are working a bit in the same direction. So it's just a question of what you would like to use this kind of interesting application. Thank you.
Do you want to? So if I understand your questions, are you concerning about the right to be forgotten, like under GDPR? What are the actual use case?
I think he was saying that in most European jurisdictions, court cases that are published have to be redacted, and PII has to be taken out. Is
Yeah.
that sort of a potential application for?
Yeah.
I think, Erich, I think, is that sort of the right? Is that correct?
That's fully correct. So it's a huge task, actually. There's so many court decisions that should be published, and we can't do it because we have nobody who can do the work. And if we have an application that really works, would be a huge use for the many decisions that should be published or make available to the public. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's one of the challenges when you work for this field, right? Like so far, in the beginning, I shared the 4 conditions that considered to be like under the right to be forgotten, right? But it's only 4. Apparently, there was a lot more, guidance to consider that when you believe we should remove your data or redact your data, right? I think as of now, I think our focus now is to be able to identify correctly all the PI information. And then for like whether we should redact this information, we have to consider what type of industries, right? What are the particular use case that would require? Like for instance, if we want to redact a name, under health industry, we probably want to use patient, but for any other industries, like it might have to use a different names so there is a certain things to consider, but that should happen kind of like in the next phase. I think for our team, the right now is to like really focus on, we want to identify the correct information by training LM, but in the training process, you want to also consider what are the possible scenarios that we might disclose a personal information, and you need to provide that context to LM so LM can understand, oh, that's the PI, that's not PI, right? I think Janesh showed it in his demo, but this is a very complicated process, and we're learning, and that's why we need more folks to kind of help out.
So it sounds like there are a couple of companies out there that are trying to help in redaction and for different industries and different use cases. But it sounds to me that the problem, the sort of one of the main problems that you guys are addressing is sort of this kind of over redaction and just having a more nuanced kind of capability for your model to do that. And that's very cool. And as you said, this sort of like kind of the starting point of you building a community around that and open source community. I hope some of the folks in this group will be joining the community and helping you kind of advance this. And we're already 5 minutes over our time, but I think I really appreciate you guys. First of all, this being a project that came out of our LLM and Law, our first LLM and Law hackathon, and that you guys sort of stuck with it and making it real. I think is very exciting to us at CodeX to see that we had a little role in kind of sparking this idea, and I think it can go a long ways. And so I would like to ask you to perhaps share your contact information, which you've just done. Thank you. Wow, you're like faster than I can speak. You can read my so anyway. So if you folks have any more follow-up questions for Emma or Janesh or Yi, please reach out to them directly. Thank you so much for presenting here at CodeX today. And we'll be closing here now. We'll send out a message about our next session soon. I don't know, Megan, are we having a session next week or in 2 weeks? Or?
Yes, I think we have 2 presenters next week.
Okay, so next week we'll have a longer meeting again, and yeah, stay tuned. We'll send out a message about that early next week. And yeah, thank you all. Good to see you all, and thank you again to our presenter. So quick round of applause, and yeah, I hope you all have a good rest of your week, and look forward to seeing you all next week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.